They didn't call you heartless until your silence made them face their own. Let's get one thing straight. They distanced themselves first. They pulled back, acted cold, treated you like noise. You didn't turn cold overnight. You just stopped handing warmth to people who used it to burn you. But now that their mask is slipping and their guilt is growing, they're rewriting the story. They're painting you as heartless, disconnected, cold-blooded. They're whispering lies in rooms they know you don't enter anymore, telling people you never cared, that you were always detached. But the truth? They couldn't handle the version of you that stopped begging to be understood. These are the same ones who dismissed your truth, treated your empathy like a liability, and made your presence feel like a burden. You weren't cold, you were exhausted. You weren't heartless, you were surviving. And now, because they no longer have access to the version of you they could manipulate, they're calling you the villain in a play they wrote and directed. But what they don't understand is this. The universe doesn't abandon its chosen ones. It isolates them to sharpen them. So while they were gossiping, you were growing. While they were spinning tales, you were building truth in silence. Before we go further, if this already hits, do something powerful with it. Hit the like button, subscribe, drop a comment, because when you engage, the system takes notice. Every interaction tells YouTube, this message matters. Every share sends this signal deeper into the matrix, where more chosen ones are waking up, wondering if they're the problem. Help them realize they're not. They're the clarity that makes cowards uncomfortable. Now let's rip the curtain down completely. They say you're emotionless, but where was their emotion when you needed presence, not performance? Where was their loyalty when your soul screamed for honesty instead of silence? You stood in front of them, raw, open, real, and they flinched. Not because of what you did, but because of what you represented. Truth, accountability, reflection. You were the mirror they couldn't face, so they shattered it and blamed you for the shards. Chosen one, you are not heartless. You're haunted by the weight of everything you carried for people who only loved you when you were easy to digest. You didn't walk away because you lacked love. You walked because you ran out of ways to keep bleeding for people who never once offered a bandage. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. And that clarity, it haunts them. The same ones who called you too deep, too intense, too much, are now choking on the silence they created. They miss the light, but won't admit they broke the bulb. They feel the absence, but lie about the reasons, because to admit the truth would mean confessing they had something valuable and lost it. You see, the power of being chosen is terrifying to people who built their identity on false narratives. You were never meant to play small. You were designed to expose the rot behind the curtain. And the second you stopped chasing people who ghosted your soul, your energy became louder than any words you could ever speak. That silence, its pressure, its presence, it's a message the universe carved into the space they once occupied. You had a real one. You lost them. So let them talk, let them lie, let them perform their pity parade. You don't owe them warmth after they fed you ice. You don't owe them softness when they built a stage on your silence. And you damn sure don't owe them access to a heart they tried to freeze. You're not heartless. You're just done bleeding for people who blamed you for the wound. So if they've been out there twisting your silence into selfishness, calling you heartless while hiding the fact they turned cold first, then this message was carved for you. Drop the number 77 in the comments if you're done letting liars rewrite your story. Hit that like button to show the algorithm that truth still has a voice. Subscribe if you're ready to reclaim your narrative, and send this signal out to every chosen one who's been punished for protecting their peace. This isn't just content, it's a confirmation, and every interaction fuels the fire that fake love can't survive. And now, let's peel this open, layer by brutal layer. If you've truly been marked as one of the chosen, this won't just speak to you, it'll sting with recognition. You won't just watch, you'll remember. Stay with me. Don't flinch, don't scroll. Let's expose the lies they tried to bury you beneath. Let's get into it. Number 1, they ghosted your truth. Now they haunt themselves with it. They muted you, then screamed about your silence. They didn't leave like warriors. They slipped away like shadows, quiet, calculated, cold. One day they were there, pretending to care, wearing empathy like a costume, and the next, gone, ghosted. But not because you were heartless, because you had too much heart. And it made them uncomfortable, because when you spoke truth, they didn't hear it as honesty. They heard it as a threat. You saw too much, felt too deeply. And when people survive off illusions, your clarity feels like violence. Now they whisper that you're distant, that you lack emotion, that you're numb, selfish, unreachable. But let's not twist the timeline. They distanced themselves first. They silenced the conversation, turned their backs, avoided the truth in your eyes, and now they panic because you're not chasing the echo of a connection they killed. And here's what burns them most. You didn't chase them. You didn't beg. You didn't explain. You didn't unpack your heart and offer it back to the ones who treated it like trash mail. You did the one thing they weren't prepared for. You disappeared from their reach without losing your voice. You withdrew, but didn't wither. You became still, but not silent. Your energy kept speaking, and now they hear it in every room they walk into, even if you're no longer in it. This is the rage of the rejected liar, the one who distanced themselves first, but is now haunted by the silence of the one they tried to discard. Because chosen ones don't need to raise their voice. Their absence is thunder. They tried to tell people, you never cared, but here's what they won't say. You were the one who cared first, loudest, and most consistently. You were the one who reached out when they recoiled, who saw through the mask and still stayed longer than you should have. You poured presence into a space that was already closing its doors. And when you finally stopped knocking, they called you cruel. Make it make sense. They want the world to believe you're emotionally unavailable. But let's talk about what really happened. You gave, you opened, you revealed your pain, your passion, your patterns, and they couldn't handle it. Because people who lie to themselves for a living don't want to be around mirrors. And you were a mirror with no filter. You weren't mean, you were real, you weren't cold, you were awake. And that made them uncomfortable because you weren't just reflecting who they were, you were reminding them who they're not. Think about the greats. Malcolm X wasn't called heartless because he hated peace. He was called dangerous because his clarity didn't bend to comfort. Prince didn't get mocked because he lacked feeling, but because he had the audacity to express his fullness in a world terrified of truth in motion. Even Frida Kahlo, broken spine, shattered life, and still painted her pain raw. They called her dramatic, but what they really meant was, she's saying too much, and I see myself in the mess she refuses to hide. So what makes you think it would be any different for you? You're not being labeled because you're wrong. You're being labeled because you refuse to play dead when others pretend the room isn't on fire. You were the one screaming smoke while they sprayed air freshener on the lies. They couldn't kill your message, so they tried to assassinate your character. But here's what their ego can't digest. The universe protects its chosen, always, and that's silence you stepped into. It wasn't emptiness, it was a fortress. You didn't disappear, you were being preserved. While they performed for applause, you were getting realigned. While they mocked, you were recharging. And now, you're the quiet storm coming for every illusion they built on your back. It hurts them that you didn't fold, that you didn't crumble, that even after they ghosted your truth, you didn't become bitter, you became bolder. That's what keeps them up at night. Not just the memory of what they did, but the realization that you survived it without ever stooping to their level. They ghosted your truth because they couldn't control the light you carried. And now, they're haunted by it. Because every time they try to tell someone who you were, they remember who you are. Still standing, still glowing, still untouchable. The silence you left behind didn't disappear. It echoes, loud, cold, precise, and nothing terrifies a manipulator more than a truth they can no longer distort. You might be asking yourself, but why does it still hurt? Because you loved deeply. Because your care wasn't performative, it was cellular. Because even in the betrayal, you didn't stop hoping. That's not weakness, that's your superpower. Chosen ones feel fully. It's how we see what others miss. It's why we catch the lies early, why we grieve before the collapse, why our absence shakes rooms that once treated us like furniture. But let me say this loud enough for your doubt to hear. You are not heartless. You are holy. You are not disconnected. You are divinely redirected. And you are not emotionless. You are a storm of clarity, still learning how to make thunder without apology. So no, you didn't go quiet because you didn't care. You went quiet because they didn't. And now that they feel your absence more than they ever valued your presence, they're scrambling to save face. Let them. That's not your fight. That's not your karma. That's not your mirror to clean. You've already left the room. And your silence, it still speaks volumes. Let it. Number 2, chosen one, they needed you. Quiet, so they could rewrite the script. They distanced themselves, then played victim to the distance. Chosen one, this was never just silence. It was strategy. You see it now, don't you? The same ones who treated you like noise, who turned cold, who ghosted your truth with surgical precision, they needed to disappear first. Not because they were hurt, not because they were confused, but because they were preparing their exit story. They needed time and space to rewrite the script in which you were the problem, and they were just reacting to your heartlessness. But here's the twist they didn't expect. You didn't lash out. You didn't feed the drama. You didn't show up to the role they cast you in. Instead, you did something far more dangerous. You got quiet. And your silence? It killed the fiction. Because when liars don't have a reaction to distort, they get sloppy. And your stillness became their panic. They needed you loud, they needed you defensive, they needed you to explain yourself, to over-justify, to beg for understanding. Because that's the trap, isn't it? They treat you like you're disposable, and when you finally stop showing up, they say, "See, I told you they never cared." What they leave out is the part where they stopped listening long before you stopped speaking. You weren't the villain, you were the warning they ignored. But to admit that would mean owning their own coldness, their cowardice, their manipulation. So instead, they flipped the script. They tell others, you just changed. You became distant. You shut down. As if your withdrawal happened in a vacuum. As if it wasn't the direct result of them turning love into leverage. This is what manipulators do best. They set fire to the bridge, then cry about being stranded. They erase the first half of the story so they can narrate the second half as if you were always the threat. It's not just disrespectful, it's calculated. because nothing protects an insecure ego like a good scapegoat. And you, chosen one, you were never meant to be the villain. You were just the only one with enough clarity to stop performing. They needed you to be quiet because your voice carried too much truth. Every time you spoke, you interrupted their illusion. Every time you pointed out the cracks in the connection, they felt exposed. So they went silent, not to protect their peace, but to preserve their narrative. They didn't distance themselves out of healing. They backed away to build a case. And that silence, that cold, manufactured distance, it wasn't confusion, it was choreography. They were building the version of events they'd share in private rooms, over text messages, on subtle posts, meant to make you look like the one who abandoned something real. But let's ask the real questions. Where were they when you needed someone to show up without conditions? Where was the empathy when your emotions made the room uncomfortable? Where was the loyalty when you stopped being easy to control? They didn't leave because you failed. They left because you figured it out. And now that you're silent, truly silent, it terrifies them, because your silence doesn't mean defeat. It means discernment. It means evolution. It means their version of you can't survive in the new light you walk in. And the more they talk, the more they expose themselves. Because real ones don't need to explain why they left. They leave with truth in their bones and dignity in their silence. You're not the villain in this story. You're the plot twist they didn't see coming. You didn't go quiet because you lacked words. You went quiet because they didn't deserve your truth anymore. And your withdrawal wasn't a collapse, it was correction. The universe saw how long you tried, how often you bent, how much you gave, and now it's returning your energy with interest. Chosen one, stop doubting the power of your stillness. You didn't run, you didn't vanish, you just stopped feeding the performance. And now that the script is unraveling without your cooperation, the spotlight they wanted is burning them alive. Let them spin the story. You carry the truth, and that truth doesn't need defense, it just needs distance. Number 3, they shut you out, then called you emotionless. They buried the bridge, then blamed you for not crossing it. This is how they play the game, chosen one. They shut the door in your face, locked it, and then stood behind it crying to everyone that you never tried to knock. They went quiet first, pulled away, pulled back, grew colder by the day, not because they were hurting, but because they couldn't handle the heat of your honesty. And then, when you stopped showing up to the ice storm, they looked around and said, "See? They never cared." That's the setup. That's the tactic. They'll starve you of empathy, then accuse you of being emotionally unavailable. They will stop checking on you, then accuse you of isolation. They'll shut you out and turn the silence into a narrative, one where you're the cold one, the detached one, the stone-hearted one. But let's cut through the illusion. You weren't cold, you were exhausted. They didn't understand your depth, and instead of trying to meet you there, they labeled it as emotional distance. But that's what shallow people do when confronted with deep water. They panic and call it dangerous. You didn't pull back out of cruelty, you pulled back because the connection became one-sided, and pouring into emptiness eventually leaves you dry. But what's wild, what's truly infuriating, is how quickly the blame flips. One moment, they're the ones going quiet, ghosting your vulnerability, turning real conversations into avoidance. The next, they're painting you as robotic, heartless, cold. It's a classic manipulation. Hurt someone, then blame them for bleeding too quietly. They couldn't meet you in your storm, so they called you thunder. Couldn't hold your truth, so they called it drama. Couldn't look you in the eye once you saw through the mask, so they claimed you had nothing behind yours. Let's be real, they never wanted the real you. They wanted the digestible version, the version that smiled when it was breaking, the version that asked how they were doing even when you hadn't heard from them in weeks. The version that loved without boundaries. That's what they miss. Not you, but the version of you that didn't make them accountable for anything. You gave them access to your soul, and they called it too much. But now that you've closed the door, they're calling it heartless. It's laughable if it weren't so predictable, because the truth is, they couldn't handle the emotional reality of your presence, so they tried to flip it. That's always how it goes. When someone can't meet your emotional depth, they won't admit their inadequacy. They'll shame your intensity. That's not your flaw. That's your power scaring their ego. And what did they do? They buried the bridge between you, cut off the connection, stopped checking in, left your messages on read, drifted into indifference, and then had the nerve to act surprised when you stopped trying to cross. You were expected to climb the mountain with broken legs, and when you stopped midway, they acted like you never cared to begin with. But let's not pretend you didn't try. You did, over and over again. You reached out, you explained, you softened your delivery, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd finally hear the meaning beneath your words. But you weren't met with effort. You were met with emotional laziness, with deflection, with guilt trips and stone walls. So when you finally stopped talking, it wasn't silence, it was a consequence. When you stopped reaching out, it wasn't apathy, it was protection. And when you stopped explaining your heart, it wasn't detachment, it was evolution. You learned that staying available to people who confuse presence with weakness is spiritual self-sabotage. This isn't about bitterness, this is about boundaries. You didn't become emotionless, you became discerning. You started guarding your energy like it had value, because it does. And for those who once used your openness as a stage for their ego, your absence now feels like punishment. But it's not punishment, it's alignment. They shut you out and expected you to wait at the door, begging to be let back in. But chosen ones don't wait in places where their soul was once exiled. We move, we rise, we ascend. And when the room grows colder without our warmth, they don't feel guilty. They get defensive. So they rewrite the story to make themselves the victim of a distance they created. Here's what you need to understand. This narrative they're spinning, it's built on convenience, not truth. The truth is simple. You showed up until it was clear you weren't welcome. You offered your emotional presence until it was clear it was being taken for granted. And when you stopped showing up, that wasn't cruelty. That was self-respect. So let them talk. Let them whisper in rooms you no longer enter. Let them call you cold. The ones who truly know you, the real you, understand you, didn't get cold. You just stopped setting yourself on fire to keep people warm who never once asked if you were burning. And now, the silence you walk in isn't empty, it's empowered. Number 4, you spoke. They flinched. You paused. They panicked. You became the silence they can't unhear. You spoke, calm, clear, raw. You laid your truth on the table. Nothing fancy, nothing cruel, just honesty, vulnerability, emotion that wasn't masked by manipulation, just naked and real. You handed them something sacred, your inner world, your triggers, your boundaries, your story. You didn't yell, you didn't curse, you didn't demand, you just told the truth. And they flinched. Not because your truth was violent, but because it pierced through their comfort. Because when you speak from a place of alignment, those out of alignment feel it like a punch. You didn't attack, you reflected. You mirrored their emotional vacancy, their inconsistencies, their casual disrespect, and it burned. That's what happens when a chosen one opens their mouth with intention. The vibration doesn't shake the room, it shakes the illusion, and they weren't ready for that. They called it too intense, too much, too dramatic. But what they were really saying was, "This is too real for me to pretend anymore." And that's when it hit you. You weren't being heard, you were being handled. Your truth wasn't being met with curiosity. It was being dodged, mocked, minimized, watered down into something palatable, because they didn't want truth. They wanted comfort, and your honesty was too alive to be held in dead hands. So you paused, not out of weakness, not out of submission, but because you realized something profound. You were wasting sacred energy on ears that never planned to listen. And that pause, that retreat, it wasn't just a moment. It was a message. It was the beginning of a shift they never anticipated. Because when someone who always speaks starts going silent, it echoes, it vibrates, it haunts. The ones who used to hear your voice every day now feel its absence, like a missing heartbeat in a familiar song. You didn't slam the door, you just stopped knocking, and that silence became deafening, not to you, but to them. You see, they were addicted to the sound of your struggle. They needed you explaining yourself, defending your heart, trying to prove you cared. It gave them control, it gave them narrative. But now, with no words to twist, no reactions to exploit, no fire to provoke, they're left with the echo, the silence, and it's screaming everything they refused to hear when you spoke it. This is what they don't want to admit. Your silence says more than their noise ever could. It reveals, it exposes, it forces reflection. Because when you were speaking, they could distract themselves with arguments. They could gaslight, interrupt, twist your words into weapons. But now that you're quiet, all they have is the memory of what you said. And no lie they tell can drown out the part of them that knows. You were right. That's the curse and the gift of being chosen. Your truth is radioactive. It lingers. It seeps into the cracks. It sticks to their skin long after you've left the room. And while they try to repaint you as the villain, they can't unhear the final note you left behind. The one that hit too deep to ignore. The one that said, without begging or pleading, "I'm done." They thought you'd come back. They thought it was just a phase. They thought you were bluffing. Because in the past, maybe you always did. Maybe you always returned after being mistreated. Maybe you explained yourself until your throat burned. But this time was different. This time the pause was permanent, and they felt it. Now they panic. They scan their messages, rereading your last words like a prophecy. They check your posts, trying to decode the distance. They ask mutuals about you with hollow concern, not because they want closure, but because they fear accountability. They want to know if you still care, not because they care, but because your silence is exposing the emptiness of their noise. Let it. Let your stillness haunt them. Let your absence remind them that love is not an entitlement. It's a responsibility. Let your silence echo in every room they enter, every conversation where they rewrite the past, every night when their performance fades, and all they're left with is the truth you placed gently in their hands, and the choice they made to drop it. You didn't go silent out of spite. You went silent to survive, to protect your peace, to stop wasting your breath on people who only valued your voice when it sang songs they could dance to. But now you sing in silence, and that melody is louder than anything you ever said. You became the silence they can't unhear, and that's not heartlessness, that's evolution. Number 5. They called you cold, but you were just done explaining warmth to frostbitten egos. They wanted your light, not your voice. When the voice came, they turned off the lights. They didn't mind your warmth when it was silent, when it came with no expectations, no boundaries, no mirrors, when you were glowing just enough to light their shadows, but never enough to expose them. They loved your light, but only when it didn't talk back. The second your radiance started speaking, asking questions, setting standards, exposing truth, they called you cold. But you weren't cold. You were done. Done explaining your fire to people who've made a personality out of pretending they're freezing. Done justifying your presence to those who only ever wanted your energy, not your essence. Done burning your truth at the altar of their comfort. Because here's the truth they won't tell. They didn't want your warmth. They wanted your compliance. They didn't want connection. They wanted control. And when the light refused to dim itself, they called it harsh. Harsh for shining, harsh for speaking, harsh for simply existing in its full strength. But chosen one, don't mistake their discomfort for evidence. Don't let their inability to receive your presence convince you that your presence was the problem. The only reason they called you distant is because you stopped trying to convince them that your heart was real. You got wise. You grew tired of explaining soul-level warmth to people whose emotions only thaw when there's something in it for them. You didn't go numb. You got strategic. You realize that some people don't want to understand you. They want to use you, to play dress-up in your light until the mask slips and they have to face what they never intended to honor. That's when they switch. That's when they flip the narrative. You go from amazing to too intense, from real one to emotionally unavailable. Not because you changed, but because you stopped being moldable. You were never cold. They just ran out of access. And it stings them because your warmth wasn't just pleasant. It was profitable, not in money, but in energy. It made them feel seen. It made them feel valid. It gave them a sense of depth they didn't earn. And when you finally pulled it back, not to punish them, but to protect yourself, they reacted the way addicts do when the supply runs dry. They panicked. They blamed. They lied. They're cold now. They switched up. They don't care. No, you just stopped bleeding for people who got used to drinking from your wounds. You stopped explaining what love looks like to people who confuse consistency with control. You stopped handing out your soul like a free sample to those who only knew how to take. And for the first time, maybe ever, you stopped trying to be palatable. You let your light be as blinding as it needed to be. That's why they're angry, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped dimming yourself to spare their fragile ego. It's the same reason people called Muhammad Ali arrogant or Nina Simone difficult. It's why they hated James Baldwin's tone more than they could handle his truth. Because the chosen don't apologize for intensity. They walk in with it. They wake people up with it. And those clinging to sleep will always scream about how cold the morning feels. You are not cold. You are clarity. And clarity feels like ice to someone who's been lying to themselves for too long. So when they say you're emotionless, tell them, no, I just stopped explaining what love looks like to people who only recognize it when it's on their terms. When they say you're cold, remember, they're just mad they can't light up off your flame anymore. They were never looking for connection. They were looking for reflection, something to mimic. And now that they're standing alone, watching your silence burn brighter than your words ever did, they're calling it cruelty. But what it really is confirmation. Confirmation that your warmth was never the problem. It was just wasted on people who mistook it for a weakness. So let them talk. Let them throw shade at a light they can no longer stand next to. You're not cold. You're just done wasting heat on frostbitten egos. And that's power. Number 6. You were the flame. They just couldn't handle the heat without controlling it. They didn't want connection. They wanted control disguised as closeness. You were never the problem. You were the flame, radiant, alive, untamed. Not the kind of warmth they could wrap themselves in and walk away unchanged, but the kind that made them feel things they'd buried, things they didn't want to face. You didn't just light up a room, you exposed what was hiding in it, and while they smiled in your glow, they were already looking for a dimmer switch. Let's call it what it is. They weren't attracted to your energy because they understood it. They were drawn to it because they thought they could own it. They saw your heart, your consistency, your power, and believed they could control it, mold it, mute it. They mistook your giving spirit for permission to possess. But the second they realized your fire wouldn't be harnessed, that your boundaries came with your brilliance, they flipped the script. Because some people don't want love, they want obedience. They don't want connection, they want dominance that looks like intimacy. And when you didn't collapse into their frame, when you didn't play the passive role they wrote for you, they panicked. They couldn't handle the intensity without control. They couldn't handle the truth without censorship. So instead of rising to meet your energy, they began to resent it. And then they exiled you. Emotionally, physically, energetically, quietly pushing you to the edge while pretending they were the ones left behind. Pretending you were too independent, too intense, too hard to handle. As if those were flaws instead of evidence of your freedom. But here's what they'll never say out loud. Your fire exposed their cowardice, your emotional presence, your unwavering clarity. It burned through their performance. It made them uncomfortable, not because you were wrong, but because you were raw. And raw doesn't blend well with fake. You were passion in a world that rewards performance, and your refusal to be domesticated felt like rebellion to those who rely on submission to feel secure. So they rejected the flame, not because it wasn't beautiful, but because it couldn't be managed. And here's the thing about being chosen. You don't dim for comfort. You ignite for truth. You don't shrink for peace. You burn for clarity. You weren't created to be kept. You were born to be felt. And the people who couldn't feel you without trying to own you, they had to let you go, because they couldn't stand beside your fire without trying to hold the match. But don't confuse their rejection for a failure on your part. It's confirmation. Confirmation that your energy is sacred. That your fire isn't for those who only show up to feel warm, but for those who can stand the heat of honesty, intensity, and purpose. They called it ego, but it was evolution. They called it distance, but it was discernment. They said you changed, but you just stopped filtering the flame to make it easier for their ice to stay solid. Let them tell their version. Let them say you became distant, difficult, unrecognizable. You didn't stop loving. You stopped allowing love to become a leash. You stopped letting your fire be negotiated by people who only saw your light as a resource to mine, not a force to honor. You see, they liked your spark when it danced for them, when it lit their world without setting any part of it on fire. But real connection, real chosen energy, it doesn't play safe, it transforms. And that's what they couldn't handle, being changed by you without being able to say they changed you first. So they did what scared people do. They blamed you for the burn instead of admitting they weren't built for the heat. Let them, because the truth is, if they needed to own you to feel close to you, it was never connection. It was control wearing love's costume. And now that you're gone, now that your fire no longer warms them, feeds them, centers them, they feel the cold. But don't mistake their regret for realization. It's not that they suddenly understand your value. It's that they miss the power they once had when you didn't understand yours. You were never meant to be manageable. You were meant to ignite the world, and the ones who couldn't hold that truth, they were never worthy of the warmth. Number 7. Now they tell the story, but they omit the part where they left first. They stabbed you with silence, then cried about the bandage you didn't offer. Now they talk. Now they have the nerve to speak on your name, weaving tales, playing roles, building a narrative crafted for sympathy. And in their version, you're cold, you're detached, you're heartless. They say you shut down, you ghosted, you gave up on the bond. But here's the part they never mention, the part they hope no one asks about. They left first. Not always physically, not always with words, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. They vacated the connection long before you walked away. They pulled back, got quiet, dismissed your emotions, dodged your truth, treated your presence like background noise. And when you finally stopped offering yourself up to the void, that's when they suddenly found their voice. But that voice isn't speaking truth, it's spinning comfort. They're rewriting the script so they don't have to carry the weight of what they did, or more accurately, what they didn't do. Because that's the twist, chosen one. Most of the pain they caused didn't come from direct attacks. It came from absence, from emotional neglect, from making you feel invisible while still pretending to be close, from starving you of affection while smiling in public. They pulled the plug on the connection. You just turned off the light. They withdrew their warmth, and when you stopped pouring yours, they cried, "See, I knew they didn't care." But what they'll never say is how many times you tried, how many late-night texts you sent, hoping for real connection. How many conversations you initiated just to be met with one-word answers or emotional emptiness. They won't say how many times you forgave the distance, how many times you showed up despite the cold. They'll forget to mention that you held the line long after they dropped the rope, because admitting that would require a level of accountability they're not ready to carry. It would mean confessing that they had love and left it. So instead, they play the victim of a wound they created. They complain about your silence, but stay silent about their rejection. They tell the world you didn't check in, but won't mention that they stopped checking on you long before. They lament your emotional shutdown, but erase the part where they trained you to stop opening up, by punishing your vulnerability, by ignoring your pain, by pretending your depth was a burden. And when you stopped speaking, that's when they rewrote the whole damn play, cast themselves as the heartbroken, the abandoned, the confused one. "I don't know what happened," they'll say. "I thought everything was fine." But they knew, oh, they knew. They knew what they were doing every time they gave you the cold shoulder and called it space. Every time they rolled their eyes at your boundaries and labeled them drama. Every time they slowly pushed you away while still expecting your loyalty, your energy, your love. And when you finally stopped showing up for the performance, they panicked. Not because they missed you, but because they lost the ability to manipulate the narrative in real time. So now they're out here piecing together their victim story, carefully cropped screenshots, half-truths, vague posts meant to trigger guilt in the people who still know your name. And if someone dares ask, "But what did you do?" you better believe that question goes unanswered, because the truth doesn't serve them, but it strengthens you. You, the one who gave until giving became self-betrayal. You, the one who stayed long after you were already being emotionally evicted. You, the one who was willing to work it out, talk it through, hold space for someone who treated your soul like a spare room they could trash and leave without notice. Chosen one, you didn't withhold love, you withheld access to someone who misused it. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. And no matter how loud they scream their rewritten version, the real ones know. The ones who watched you bend and break and rebuild. The ones who saw how hard you tried to hold a connection with someone who was only pretending to be present. So let them talk. Let them leave out the part where they ghosted you while standing in front of you. Let them cry about the bandage you didn't offer after they stabbed you with indifference. Because the truth doesn't need a stage. It only needs time. And when time speaks, it doesn't whisper. It exposes. Number 8. Now they cry for the warmth they threw away. They miss the heat, but forget they stood outside while you burned alone. Now they cry, not because they've had an awakening, not because they suddenly realized your worth, but because the light's gone and they're cold. And in that coldness, they've confused missing the feeling of you with missing you. They're not mourning your presence. They're mourning the way your presence made them feel about themselves. Let's be honest, they didn't love you. They loved the reflection of themselves in your light. The version of them that felt important, adored, centered. You were the comfort zone, the safe space, the fire that never asked them to earn the warmth. But here's what they never acknowledged. You were burning to give it. You burned through your energy, your peace, your patience, just to keep the connection alive. You kept showing up, even when they were emotionally AWOL. You kept pouring out light, even when they gave you shade in return. And now, after all that draining, all that glowing without being seen, you've gone silent. And suddenly they feel the chill they pretended wasn't coming. They say they miss you. But what they really miss is how you made things easier, how you softened their rough edges, how you carried conversations, how you nurtured them through their own self-neglect. It was never about building something mutual. It was always about what your light gave them. They miss the way your energy buffered their emptiness. They miss the way your love disguised their avoidance. They miss the way your warmth made their cold look like mystery. But do they miss you? The real you, the one who cried quietly, the one who needed support but never received it, the one who hid exhaustion behind encouragement? No, because if they did, they'd own the role they played in your silence. But here's the painful truth, chosen one. They stood there, watched you flicker, watched you dim, watched you lose yourself piece by piece, and still, they didn't step closer. Still, they said, "You're too emotional, too sensitive, too intense." Still, they treated your glow like a given until it wasn't. Now, they miss the warmth, but they forget the price you paid to give it. They forget that you weren't a fire. They just mistook your heart for one. They forgot you had limits. That even the brightest souls burn out when they're surrounded by people who treat their energy like a resource instead of a gift. Let them cry now, let them ache in the cold, because when they had access to your light, they used it to cast shadows, not to build anything real. They weren't sitting with you, they were siphoning from you, and now that you've stepped back, now that you've cut the cord, now that you're no longer shining for free, they feel it, and it burns. Not because you hurt them, but because they lost control of the flame they never truly respected. You were never supposed to be their flashlight while they wandered through denial. You were never meant to dim just so they could feel like the brightest one in the room. You were never created to serve as someone else's emotional blanket while you froze in silence. You didn't walk away out of bitterness. You walked away because staying meant losing yourself. And now that you're gone, the silence you left behind is louder than all the comfort you used to give. It echoes. And the echo says, you had the real thing, and you wasted it. So let them sit in the chill. Let them post vague quotes. Let them hint online about people who switched up. You don't owe them explanation. You don't owe them a reunion. You owe yourself healing, and that doesn't happen under the same roof where your soul was ignored. You are not obligated to be someone's warmth if they couldn't even be your shelter. Let them miss it. Let them wonder. Let them realize your presence was never an obligation. It was a privilege. And now that it's gone, they'll have to face something even colder than your absence, the truth that they caused it. Because the warmth they now cry for, they had it. They just stood outside while you burned alone. And now you see it clearly. Your silence wasn't a flaw, it was your freedom. You didn't go cold, you got clean. You didn't stop caring, you stopped chasing what never cared for you. Let them talk, let them twist. It doesn't change the truth you carry. You are not heartless, you are holy. And that silence, that was your rebirth. If this message hit where words usually miss, like this video, subscribe for more unapologetic truth and drop the number 77 in the comments if you're done being punished for your clarity. Share this with another chosen one who's been shamed for walking away silently.